I'm tempted to respond to some of the things that Professor Samatar talked about. But in the interest of time, and I'm just hoping through the questions and answers, I would be able to address some of these points. But because I have a list to finish as to how to get out of this, so I want to continue with that thought. And if there's a spare time, then I will make some comments. So what we need is also genuine grassroots discourse as to what happened, addressing some of the critical questions that Professor Samatar just talked about. There hasn't been such an effort, at least not in a sustained way. Every now and then, people are invited to speak in small circles. Everybody speaks their opinion, and then everybody goes home until the next meeting. And there are many of those conferences that take place in overseas and some throughout the diaspora and here. But there hasn't been any effort, sustained effort, to discuss what happened to us and how can we get out of that situation. So that needs to, of course, start at the grassroots level. And here we have young, dynamic people who can actually start such project and run with it. Separating also the symptoms from the root causes of problems. You know, oftentimes when you listen to people deep enough, what they describe is, in essence, the symptoms, not the real, the real problem. So separating the two is very critical. And then, of course, a genuine movement to salvage the nation. And again, I gave you a hint earlier. There's a difference between movements and political parties, in my opinion. Okay? Movements, they're driven by purpose, by vision. And as long as that vision is accomplished, it makes no difference who is in the front line. In political parties, they have a platform. It does matter who is on the front line, who takes the seat. You know? So in the case of Somalia, for example, we had SYL. At the time, it was a movement. It was a liberation movement. So it really did not matter who was. In fact, the top people who were really put a lot of effort in driving that vision did not hold any did not take any ministerial positions or become people of power, basically. Okay, until they became a political party, and then that political party fragmented some. But genuine movement that starts from grassroots, that says, okay, getting back the country in order, or whatever vision that is articulated, reconstituting the nation or what have you. And cultivating enlightened, what I call enlightened nationalism. See, our sense of nationalism was based on liberating the country on one hand, and then getting back the lands that were taken from us. In other words, irredentism. So now the enlightened one would be devoid of that. It would be based on, and I know the professor said something about these kind of religiously motivated efforts and what have you, but I'll name the Turkish model, for example. The movement is realizing or serving others, serving yourself by serving others. Imagine that. You know, you want to serve yourself, serve others. You want to have a sense of justice, speak for the others, speak against the others as injustice, and so forth and so on. In our case, when we talk about injustice, it's always focused on the political. But there are people whose injustice were committed against them since time immemorial. To this day, we tolerate, and we don't speak in favor of those people. We don't defend their rights. But we will defend the elite who have the voice to speak for themselves or others to speak on their behalf. These are minority groups. Some are like similar to the untouchables, for example, of India. We have that within our society. So if you're not really speaking for that against that injustice, then who are you to really morally speak about other injustices that are happening to clans that were denied this access or that access? So these realities have to be confronted, and it can be only confronted through honest, genuine, direct dialogue between people, and that's not taking place. What we also need is the cultivation of transformational leaders. Because right now, what our society lacks is people to stand and say, it's not about me. It's not about my clan. It is about the vision. It is about, as long as that is fulfilled, then everything is okay. Somebody who has that credibility. We don't have that. And regardless of whatever cover they give it to, when you listen to it deep enough, you realize it's changing Ali with Jama and Hussein with Robert. It boils down to that. Taking one person and putting another person in. Because in reality, if it is about transforming this society, people stick their necks out, right? I mean, we have modern day transformational leaders who touched every aspect of societies, from the prophets to some political leaders who succeeded in certain aspect of life. Certain aspect of life. They might have succeeded on the political side and failed in the family side, another side, and what have you. And there are transformational leaders who were broad-based leaders. The prophets, to me, are one of those. Who succeeded in so many different ways and really left a legacy that we're discussing to this day. I know Professor Samatar is not going to like this. But the reality is this. Now, the others have succeeded in one particular sector, and that's good. We can look up to a person such as Nelson Mandela, who saved a nation from really getting revenge against each other, right? Is he a transformational leader? Of course he is. He practiced forbearance. After 27 years of imprisonment, he decided to forgive everybody, right? He did not talk about this in the theory sense. He practiced it. And there's a big difference between the practice and the theory. Between delivering that action and just saying it. We can stand here and find 3 million problems that country has. And I've already admitted that. And I also said, if you bring the 1,000 most brilliant individuals in the world and put them in places and come back and visit them 2 years later, you will still have another million items to criticize them for. So going back to the metaphor of the patient, if the patient is moving a finger after being comatose, that's an act worthy of celebration to me. That drives me. I will look at that, and I will say, this is wonderful. Then we can go to the next step, and the next step, and the next step. But if you are failing to understand that, and all the focus is the negative, and then divide some more people, then of course you're not going to help. We can discuss this thing till the cows come home, and nothing will happen. And that is where I said earlier, when I said in every sector leadership failed. Societies are saved by its elites. Let's face it, whoever those elites are, whether they're in academia, in the masajids, in the churches, or whatever, or in the temples, or wherever they are, those elites are the ones that save societies. But if the elites are consumed by the negativity, and they become part of the laity, and all they're talking about is negative, 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 and no way out, why would anyone want to invest in that country to be safe? Let's all go home and let's all worry about our families. We all have better things to do in life. The donor nations mentality is that way. The elite of the society became that way. The laity became that way. So everybody started cleaning their own areas and sticking a little flag in there and calling themselves president. They have their own foreign minister. They have a defense minister. They want to establish a parliament. They're a little country. They're a fiefdom. And then there will come a time when down the road, not only would they have some issues among themselves as a balkanized nation, but also some of these people would be joining even neighboring countries as to become part of that. Why not? The country was not sustainable. The country only produced 240 maximum, and the professor can correct me, $248 to $58 million a year, and consumed over $1 billion every year. And the difference was paid by wealthy Arab nations and a few others. Since independence. So what are we talking about? We're talking about still an infant country that needs all its people, all its resources, regardless of who those people are. And here we have an opportunity, and this is where I decided as a person to really invest in the youth. They're different than the previous and the traditional and intellectuals, if you will. And I hate to say this, because the traditional intellectuals came from a school of thought that was just primarily, in one way or another, with due respect to Professor Samatar and Abdi Samatar, whom I have a great respect for, they produced something. But there is a huge body of the Somali intellectuals that are really indifferent about what's happening. And to them, it was like it's about me. And there are a lot of them now. There are a lot of them. Professor Samatar participated in one of the conferences 2 years ago for those youth, 3 consecutive years. The 3rd year was held last year in Boston. The hope is to really produce those leadership, transformational leadership that we are talking about for that country. Now, otherwise, it's just a discussion. Okay, I was told to stop, please, so I was stopping. Thank you.
You know, as I said early on, I've been in this business for, in fact, it's more than 25 years, almost 30 years now, and this is the first time, thanks to Carlton and its students, and particularly ASEA, for creating some conversation of this kind, maybe even a little debate. So this is good. This is good. And I treasure what my brother Arman has been saying. I think on many things, I think we are on the same page. But it's also good that we have some significant disagreements. Let me make a few comments on this. If I had time today, I would have taken my arguments one more step and maybe a little bit more deeper than I have done to get to the foundations of at least what I think bedevils the Somali people. And it is this, without having the time to unpack it, that in fact I would argue that at the very basic level, the Somalis are caught up in a great historical trap. Yeah, great historical trap. And that's a trap of transition, decaying cultural time, yeah, long before independence. Culture and a way of being in the world that was increasingly showing that it cannot, let me repeat this, profitably participate in the age of modernity. It can't. It might have been good in its own limited circumstances, living on the edge, portable pastoral communities doing that. But that is not, in my opinion, in its totality, efficacious enough to take one to deal with the complexity and the challenges of modernity, which you are thrust into by the circumstances of history. So, the deep challenge for the Somalis has been, continues to be, this is my ultimate point of argument. The deep challenge for the Somalis has been, continues to be, and it will continue to be like that in the future, of transition from a tradition and a way of being in the world, which had its own glory and its own beauty and its own capacity, but cannot, in its own totality, become efficacious in a more complex modern world. And that affects every aspect of life, including the household. Including the household. If we do a very basic analysis of the household, Somali household, even the ones that might be anchored in modernity, you will find out the limitations of that. So the challenge for the Somalis, therefore, has been a challenge of transition. And the challenge of transition is what I have called the challenge of synthesis. synthesis. How do you go about understanding Somali culture and historical, in organic Somali historical time, and the challenge of modernity that the Somalis cannot escape? They're not going to live in another planet. They have to live in the world of the 21st century like everybody else. How do you synthesize those? Yeah. Most Islamic societies confront that, by the way. Yeah. Everybody talks about Turkey. You wouldn't hear another country being talked about. Turkey. Yeah. It's a new little model. We don't know where it will go. But they have some chance, the possibility perhaps. But all Muslim societies are caught up in this trap. And the trap of how do you understand your own historical background and certain institutions and life, way of being in the world, and then transform that, the word transformation, into something that fits and is capable of negotiating successfully with the complexity of modernity. Democratic culture is part of that, for example. So the challenge of the transition is the challenge of synthesis. That will be my basic argument. Well, I will rest my argument. And even the catastrophe is really on top of that. Few final points. Question of leadership. Look, even if you just map the last 50 years of Somali history, 1960 to the present, you will find, and some of us have written about this, you will find particular individuals, yeah, cohort of individuals who in fact met the challenge of their own time as leaders. We have people like that. They have happened in modern Somali contemporary history. I can name two of them for you. The first president of Somalia, the first African president, Sub-Saharan Africa, the first one to ever leave office democratically after he was defeated, Aden Abdullah Osman. He was a Somali. Now you talk about the Somali being the first African Democrat today, people won't believe you. But he did exist, and he died a few years ago at the age of 101. Left the office in 1967 after he was defeated and said, look, I'm gone, thank you very much, but you better be careful that you do not destroy democratic processes, because if you do, you will regret for the rest of your lives. We had also a prime minister who put all of his effort in trying to create a governance system, an administration that will be grounded in two words that are now part of the folklore of Somali political history. Karti iyo hufnan. Yeah. Karti, competence. Hufnan, cleanliness, but in many honesty. Yeah, honesty. And ethical. Karti iyo hufnan. Ability and ethics. And he ran his administration for 4 years in that way. Legendary now. He lives in the Twin Cities. You can talk to him. He's nearly 90 years old. So there are historical moments in Somali modern history in which you can find moments of hope in which individuals rose to meet the challenge. Finally, I agree with my colleague. Yeah, of course it is the elite. I don't know of any society, and certainly in the modern era, in which the challenge of the historical contradictions that confront that society was not led by a particular elite. I don't know of any. Peasants don't just walk up one day and then take over the university and reorganize the curriculum. They just don't. So having an elite is absolutely indispensable. The question is, what kind of an elite? I think that's where we agree also. What kind of an elite? My argument is that the elite of the Somali society, particularly in the last 20 years, and if we had time, we could do an anatomy, have failed us on this, including the current ones. I had the privilege of sitting with Sharif, the transitional federal president who runs a few blocks in Mogadishu. Yeah. I had the privilege of sitting with him for 4.5 hours, the two of us. Yeah, talk about theory and practice. Yeah, when he came to the United States. Yeah, he asked me if I could meet with him, so I said, okay, let's meet. And gave him ideas, 4 ideas. Start working on these things. We'll support you. Okay. Nothing happens. That is theory married to practice. Okay? We have studied these things for 30 years. Here are some ideas that you might want to use. At least try them, people. Nothing happens. My argument, therefore, this is where we will disagree. I argue that, in fact, without theoretical clarity, practice is a blind man walking. Without theoretical clarity, practice is a blind man walking, and dangerous. And then I would close by this. The relationship between theory and practice, thank you, between theory and practice is not as distant from each other as some would make. I know you don't make that, but sometimes you intimate that. Ideas and the creation of ideas, if that's what theory is, the creation of ideas is in fact acting. Knowing something is acting. Okay? It is the first and the most significant step in whatever else one wants to do. First, know it. So the creation of theory, the creation of knowledge is action. But even if you want to move beyond that, the relationship between theory and practice, therefore praxis, old word, yeah, from my point of view, demands that you create some kind of an organization. Here we agree with each other. An organization. Yeah. Whether you call it a movement or a political party. A political party is a movement. It's a particular kind of a movement. It's particular because it is grounded in politics, and therefore its agenda is to get inside the state, reconfigure the state, and then make the state function in particular ways based on the political platform. And for those of you who might not know, I am one of those people in the academy. I've been in the academy for 30 years. The Somalis have accused me again and again. Samatar is always just talking intellectual. Why don't you do something about Somali people and Somali society? Well, I am part of a Somali intellectuals who have created a political party 8 months ago. It's available. It has offices inside the country. If that is not the relationship between theory and practice, by creating a political party inside the country, which is open to all Somali people who want to be part of this, then I don't know what else is civic life. So, practice and theory go together, even in the first instance of creating knowledge, ideas, concepts. And then secondarily, in connecting them two together in terms of organizing people, I think political parties is what people do. You see. But then the quality of that political party would have to be examined under the full examination of people observing. Thank you very much.